Welcome to the Total Soccer Show and The Big Thing. It's the show where we go deep on one of the biggest news stories in the beautiful game. On this episode, we're focusing on Tottenham, one of the biggest clubs in Europe, some might say, with one of the best stadiums and an expectation to be in the upper echelons of the Premier League. But things aren't going too well. Tottenham, of course, fired coach Thomas Frank on Wednesday after just 8 months in charge, following Tottenham's 2-1 defeat at home to Newcastle on Tuesday. As we record right now, Spurs are 16th in the Premier League, just 5 points above the relegation zone, and winless in their past 8 Premier League games. We're going to ask what's gone wrong, how it happened, and how Tottenham get themselves out of this little old mess they're in. My name's Ryan Bailey. Joining me today to have that discussion, hello, Taylor Rockwell.
Hello, Ryan Bailey. I am very excited and enthusiastic to be here, not necessarily because we're talking about a person losing their job, but because it's one of those episodes where I think because I liked Thomas Frank and thought Brentford were good coming in to his appointment to Spurs, I thought, oh, this makes sense, and we'll see how it goes. And now the narrative seems to be, well, this was never going to work, and it was always a terrible appointment, and I'm excited to figure out who's wrong and why.
I'd love to go back to the episodes after sort of that with the Super Cup when he came in.
No, don't do that. That's going to reflect very badly
Graham, I
on
think
me.
you had some positive things to say.
Let's not do that. Actually, I think those were wiped.
Okay, we've lost those. Yeah. They've gone off the hard drive of the internet,
Thomas
unfortunately.
Frank is better than Big Ange. Oh, no, Graham. Oh, no.
Yeah. Graham Russman, how are you? We have lost one of the Premier League coaches you'd probably want to go for a beer with, right?
I think we would want to go for a beer with Thomas Frank. I don't think Spurs fans would want to go for a beer with him. I mean, I've read that he is their most unpopular manager in history, so they saw him in a very different light. And like Taylor, I'm interested to dive into this whole discussion. Ryan, I was going to ask you, how long will it be before you aim a jab at Tottenham in this episode? I think it took you 6 seconds into your intro with the big club.
Supposedly big club?
Was that I'm just reporting what Ange Postecoglou said. We're going to get to that later on. Right, we'll get to that later on. But not before we say hello to Joe Lowry. Joe, how are you? Are you doing okay after this Tottenham news?
Emotionally, okay? I'm just barely recovering. I cared so much, and I feel really burdened by what's happened. I love when you're reading about this and you're trying to gather information for these kind of shows. I'm sure we all read some of the same stories, and they're really well done. After every managerial firing, there's always the reporting from all these outlets like, oh, well, the manager had a too tight of a grip on the locker room and didn't give players their freedom. And then the next line is, but some other players viewed it as the manager was too loose and didn't give them enough structure, and they wanted more of the dogmatism that the predecessor had. Every manager is going to ruffle people in some way or another, and I just think it's funny how you get that exact same recipe in literally every single one of these big coach firings. Yeah, people grade on people, I suppose, is one of the takeaways here.
And we're all just human, after all.
Oh, so true.
That's a song, isn't it?
Joe,
anyway,
you forgot the ultimate conclusion of that and it paints a picture of a muddled situation at the club in which no one was happy. And it's like, all right, I feel like we're connecting dots there. Sure,
yes,
why not?
Yes, we are.
There we go. Well, ladies and gents, this is the big thing. We have a big thing of our own to announce. We've got a big announcement coming for you guys. We are reintroducing the Total Soccer Show Scouting Network. Woo! Drum roll, please.
Yeah.
No, should have done the drum roll before I said that. This is our listener-led network of scouts assessing some of the best young players in world soccer. It's a simple concept. Some of you might have been involved in our previous iteration of this. Basically, you become a scout, you assess one of the best young players in world soccer. We can assign you that player, or you can request a player. And those reports that you will produce will be used on this here feed on the Total Soccer Show and TSS Plus on our bonus feed. Every week, we're going to be reading out your scouting reports, and you can chat about your findings with your friends in our Discord as well. So patreon.com/Total Soccer Show to find out more about this and to sign up to the TSS Scouting Network. Graham, it's here. Excited?
Yeah, I am genuinely excited. I always thought this was obviously this is TSS heritage, but this predates my involvement with the podcast. I always thought this was an absolutely outstanding idea, just because we are all invested in, like, who doesn't love a wonder kid emerging and going on to become a big thing? And we've all had those players that we felt like a little bit of ownership of because we felt like we knew about them first. And so I think the Scout Network really taps into that. So yeah, really excited to get this going. We've had it planned for a little while, I think it's fair to say. And those reports, I think, are going to be really useful as we kind of sprinkle them throughout our episodes every single week.
I feel that sort of ownership completely illogically over Joe Fernandez, who everybody knows about because PSG just signed him from Barcelona. It's one of the most famous clubs on the planet. But I just learned who this guy was, and now I think he's mine. And I'm very excited to see how he does. It is so fun going through some of the back-end stuff here because we're sort of looking through young players, and it's getting me to think about them a little bit. I will echo Graham. Back when I used to listen to TSS, because this also predates me, listening to Taylor and Dale read through some of these reports, it was so fun. Like, it genuinely was one of my favorite things about the show because it gave us as listeners access to insight that we just can't really get from any other show. So I'm stoked. I'm really excited to see what this looks like.
Yeah, likewise. Taylor, very excited about this. It doesn't predate me. I remember the old Scouting Network and reading some of those scouting reports. Excited to do it again and bring it back to the feed, Taylor.
I definitely am. I really am. It was one of my favorite things, and I was sad that it was gone and a lot of work, and now it's back, and the four of us get to share that lot of work. But it was a great way to track players, and I think like where it was born was Manucho Gonçalves, the Manchester United striker. Who
he hit for sure, right? Yeah.
Sort of. But then, like,
a couple times.
But the idea was like, but then he's playing here and he pops up there. Like, what's going on there? How did he find his way to like Estonia? How did that? I'm not sure he did, but that's the other side of it. Is like for every wonder kid that breaks through and ends up at Real Madrid, you have so many players that end up with like Shayon Harrison playing with the Shrimpers. I forget who the Shrimpers are, but just like going down the pyramid, but then sometimes coming back up, and you're like sort of tracking them along the way. Sometimes they end up in Major League Soccer. Then you get to be the psycho who's like, I followed you when you were 17, and now you're playing here. And then they get a restraining order, and you get to report on that. It's a whole good thing.
No, that doesn't sound like a good thing. But
it's fine.
The TSS Scouting Network is a
Manucho
good
and I
thing.
can totally be within 100 yards of each other. It's
100%.
I was good with Manucho. He retired in 2019. He was with Cornella in Spain. But before that, Rayo Vallecano, Valladolid. So whoever had him in the old Scouting Network had a good time. There's a good few teams in here.
There we go. Good times to be had by all in the TSS Scouting Network, which is being rebranded as the TSS Scouting Network. Do join us on their details on our Patreon, patreon.com/Total Soccer Show, and on our socials. She's alive! Come check it out. That's our big thing. Let's get to the big thing of this here episode. Thomas Frank, who, Graham, left the stability of Brentford for the chaos of Spurs. He took a gamble. He did not win that gamble. What has happened? How have we got to this point, Graham?
Yeah, so this had been coming. I think anyone who has watched Tottenham recently will have felt that. No wins in their last 8 games, 2 wins in 17 going back to October. It has been bleak for a while, and in particular the game against Newcastle on Tuesday night was absolutely the end. It was obvious to everyone inside that stadium who was singing Mauricio Pochettino's name throughout very loudly. That told you something. Also singing you're getting sacked in the morning when that's coming from your own supporters, you know that the writing is on the wall. And I watched that game, that performance. I know it was against Newcastle, who, you know, the Spurs have had more shocking defeats this season, but the performance was just so lackluster, and you could feel the detachment between the fans and the team. It wasn't until Spurs actually equalised in that second half that a lot of them came out into the bowl of the stadium from the bars, like in the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. So they don't want to watch this team. It doesn't feel like any of the players were engaged. There was no buy-in. And Newcastle won 2-1, but it could have been 3 or 4. And with some of the other results going against them, you could feel the collective realisation that Spurs are absolutely in a relegation fight now. I know they were down there last season. They finished 17th, which was their worst ever finish. But there was never any genuine chance that they would go down because the 3 teams below them were so bad, right? Southampton, Ipswich, and Leicester. That was done 2/3 into the season. This season, West Ham, Forest and Leeds are all showing varying signs of life. They all picked up points midweek. Crystal Palace have won recently as well against Brighton. So in the last couple of weeks, the framing of Spurs' season has changed from underwhelming but not really at much risk to now they are fighting for their lives to stay in the Premier League. And it got to the point where Spurs, they just needed to roll the dice out of desperation because they can't do anything about their injuries. We'll probably talk more about their injury list, which for a second season in a row has completely decimated them. The transfer window is now closed, which was another strand of hope for them to cling to. And there's only one thing now that they can change and sort of hope for the best, and that's the manager. And I don't really know if it's going to work, but I do back this decision because they need to do something. Watching them on Tuesday night, it very much felt like this is a team that potentially is heading for relegation, which would have been unthinkable a few seasons ago.
Can I just say, you mentioned the fans in the bar, and I saw the footage of this on social media rather than watching that Newcastle game. It does kind of make me chuckle. Like, we don't like how this club is being run, but we will come, we'll pay $100 for the ticket, we'll drink the beer in the stadium as well, but we don't like it. We're not going to watch the game.
That's part of their justification for being so disgruntled, right? As I think Spurs have the highest season ticket cost in the Premier League. It's very expensive to watch those games. They very much give the impression of being a big club. And Spurs, as an institution, like to puff out their chests and remind everyone of that, being one of the Super League clubs. And Ange Postecoglou, who couldn't have timed his appearance on the overlap any better this week, just hours after Thomas Frank was sacked, he kind of provided an insight from the inside of the club on this, where he talked about the wage bill and some of the players that he wanted to bring into the club. And he was unable to because of that lack of ambition from within Tottenham Hotspur. So Spurs would maybe make a point about being well run and the cost of the stadium and PSR restrictions and all that. But it feels like there's a giant detachment between some of the expectation that's placed on Spurs, what they're willing to do, and what they're realistically able to do. And that has culminated in a series of bad decisions that has now led to this genuine threat of dropping out the Premier League altogether.
Yeah, so that's kind of the shot across the bow, which you claimed I made in the intro, Graham, is that the disconnect between what Spurs are and what they aspire to be, I suppose, which is what Ange Postecoglou mentioned on the overlap. Just to quote him from that episode, which dropped this week, they've built an unbelievable stadium, unbelievable training facilities, but when you look at their expenditure and particularly their wage structure, they're not a big club. I saw that because when we were trying to sign players, we weren't in the market for those players. When you walk into Tottenham, what you see everywhere is to dare is to do, which is the club motto. And yet their actions are almost the antithesis of that. I think they didn't realise that to actually win, you've got to take some risks. I felt like Tottenham as a club was saying, we're one of the big boys. And the reality is, I don't think they are. Now, Taylor, there is an element of Ange protecting his own legacy with that kind of thing. But he does make a point, which maybe we can expand on a little bit, that there is this disconnect between the aspiration of Tottenham Hotspur and the infrastructure they have and the financial reality that they have. And the fact that, they are a changed club with, Daniel Levy departing, and there's a lot of machinations and stuff going on beyond the manager too.
There is. What is the question?
The question is, why is Tottenham so messed up?
Fair. I think I don't ask to be pedantic. I ask because I think this is another situation in which there are just so many things seemingly wrong. There's Paratici returning and then leaving. There's Daniel Levy. There's managerial change. There's the fact that they're seemingly in a relegation battle for the second year in a row while having a lot of expensive tickets and a lot of expensive prices, while having a lot of names, but not like the biggest of names on the roster. And I can't tell if I'm seeing this through like Manchester United lenses, but it feels similar. It feels like a situation in which you struggle to look at anything that is particularly positive. And even with the departures of Harry Kane and Song Heung-min, you're losing legends of the club that haven't really been replaced. I'm not sure how you do replace them. That's a consistent criticism I've seen. Like, they haven't replaced Harry Kane. It's like, yeah, unless you bring back Harry Kane, I'm not sure how you're replacing him. But the point still stands that you don't have those sort of legends, those institutions within the team. You don't have kind of the steady hand from the manager. You don't have the steady hand from the director. And so it feels like a really chaotic situation. But at the same time, with a lot of the way they build themselves and discuss themselves, the club, it then, I think, leads to a lot of egos and a lot of personalities thinking, well, I'm being so well compensated for what I do. Why am I listening to this guy who wants me to defend when I want to possess and attack? And why am I listening to this guy who wants me to sprint back and do this or like show up on time for training? It seems like there's just kind of been ill discipline across the board in a number of different ways, culminating in the situation being as it is.
I love that this is where the discussion has gone, because I feel like so often when we talk about managers being fired, we talk about, will the next person fix them? And it sort of seems like, I know we haven't even really talked about that yet, which I like. It sort of seems like none of us really believe that about Spurs, because we've seen it too many times. And I even think the most passionate and perhaps foolish Spurs fan couldn't think that. I mean, I know they're chanting Pochettino's name. Surely those people don't really think that Poch on his own can save them. I suppose if they do, I think they're terribly misguided. But I don't think many people think that a managerial change is going to solve Spurs' problems at this point. And I think that's so true, because it is clear that the issues go deeper than who is coaching this team. There are obvious organizational challenges. Even just think about the directions they've gone. If we do want to stick in the managerial lane, though we could go many other places and should go other places, the snip-snap from Postecoglou to Frank is wild. And I recognize that at the time there was a lot of rational discussion about, well, Tottenham are horrific, truly horrific at defending. Thomas Frank can institute more structure. That's going to help take this team forward. I understand the reasoning there. It does make recruiting quite difficult when you're going from recruiting for one of the most bold coaches that has truly ever existed at the highest levels of the game and trying to play this incredibly high line in a protagonist sort of possession style with careful off-ball sort of rotations and all this control. Going from that to Thomas Frank is one of the wilder and more jarring tactical swaps that you could have, and that matters for recruitment, right? And speaking of recruitment, what is it? What's the expression? What's the motto? Dare to dare is to do.
To do, yeah.
Which is, that seems dumb to me in the first
Unless
place.
it's too expensive.
I mean, I don't know who dared them to spend what they spent on the players that they bought in the transfer window, but they've spent a lot of money, and they have dared and they have done. They've spent more money than all but 2 teams in the Premier League over the last 3 years when it comes to transfer fees. In terms of net transfer profit, so basically expenditures versus sales, their number is higher, which is to say they've spent more relative to what they're selling, than every team in the Premier League but Arsenal. And they've bought, some good players. Yes, injuries matter a lot. Like, truly a lot. And I think Thomas Frank will use that in terms of getting his next job and all those sorts of things. Missing Madison, missing Kulusevski for the season I think that's huge. And I don't think they would be in a relegation scrap to one degree or another without those guys. But spending what they've spent on the players they have is absolutely absurd. And so clearly goes beyond what the manager's influence is. There are really, really deep issues here that run all the way up to the top of the executive side of the club. And there are other issues that are closer to the field. All those things are true. And just to tie back to what I said in the first place, I'm like really glad that this is the direction the discussion has gone, because I think the tired, will Poch fix it narrative, frankly, is just a waste of everybody's time.
But, Joe, this is why Spurs have ended up in an absolute nightmare of a situation, because absolutely, we all agree there are big structural issues at this club that they need to solve before they can make any sort of meaningful progress in the seasons to come. At the same time, they also need anyone, to come into the squads and draw something new out of the group of players that aren't in the treatment room right now. Otherwise, they're going down.
Sure.
Like, that's the nightmare situation. That's why I say I feel like they had no choice but to make this change. There's no guarantee that it'll work, though. Like, what is the new manager? What license is the manager going to have if they're coming in until the end of the season? We still don't know who's the interim manager is going to be. I think most anticipate it will be Johnny Heitinga, who weirdly came in as Thomas Frank's assistant a few months ago, despite not having worked with him previously. And I think he was previously, was he Ajax manager last season, or even earlier this season? He has been a manager in his own right. I think most people anticipate it will be him. But what license is Heitinga or anyone else going to have to reshape this squad in their own image if Spurs are going to make a permanent appointment in the summer? By which time they might be in the Championship. Like, I keep holding myself back from making that point, but anyone who has watched Spurs over the last few weeks can't deny that this team is relegation fodder right now. They've won 2 games since October. That's relegation form. I think they're on course for 36 points, which in 60% of the last 20 Premier League seasons is enough to go down. Like, they are facing a fight against relegation, and so somehow they've got to square the circle between the short term and like the medium and long term, and I don't know how they do that.
Sorry,
That's almost impossible.
I know we need to take a break, but really, there's nothing they can do in the short term, right? I mean, I suppose they could hire a permanent manager versus an interim manager, but that's the only button they have to push. So I don't really know. I mean, at this point, you're just sort of crossing your fingers and hoping that you're not going to get relegated. There's no like intricate, let's go get these players. That's not going to happen. The window's closed. Am I missing something? Like what can they do that's going to accomplish what you're talking about?
Ryan Mason a third time?
I'm not going to lie. It crossed my mind.
He got fired recently. He's free.
This is going to make me sound like a proper football man. I don't mean it to, but watching Spurs, they need not Big Sam. I'm not going to give you a name of who could fix this because I'm not sure there anyone is out there. But there's such a detachment from the players and the fans and the rest of the club, and I honestly feel like any kind of buy-in to a personality would improve the situation even just like a little bit. So I look at how Carrick has gone into Manchester United and had some common sense. Now, Carrick doesn't have the injuries that Thomas Frank has. Like 12 players were missing for that game against Newcastle. And by the way, Wilson Odeberg got an ACL injury in that match as well. They barely have a team to put together, Spurs. So you're hoping that a personality can come in and draw something out of these players. That's all they're gambling on. Like that's their only hope at this point, I think.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll look at how it fell apart for Thomas Frank, what's going on with those injuries, how much he is to blame for what's going on at Tottenham. Join us then. Total Soccer Show, welcome back to the big thing. We're talking all things Thomas Frank. We're getting Frank on Frank right now. Joe, can we talk a little bit about what Thomas Frank's setup was? As we sort of hinted at earlier in the episode, we all, I think, were quite bullish about Frank when he came to Tottenham, but it's obviously not quite worked out for him. How much of this is on him and what he did and how he set up this team, and how much of it is on injuries and other external factors?
Yeah, and I suppose it depends a little bit on what we mean by it. I absolutely think that Thomas Frank has responsibility here with Spurs' struggles. I very much do. This is a classic things can be two things situation where I don't think Thomas Frank did a very good job. And I also don't think that Thomas Frank's failings are the sole reason why Tottenham are where they are, right? So we can hold both of those truths at the same time. Thomas Frank, and I mentioned this a little bit in the first segment, he was sort of a correction from where Spurs were under Ange Postecoglou. And again, there was some logic in that of we're far too open, where Spurs were legitimately just brutal against the ball last season. They had one of the highest expected goals allowed tallies in the entire league under Postecoglou. They needed to have a little bit more solidity. And I think that's true. The problem for Frank is as they become a bit more compact team, they're right around 50% or so of possession. So far, 51, I think, percent they're at this season in the Premier League. That more reserved approach where they're not nearly as expansive as they've been in past iterations. They're not building in the same way that they were building before. They're not leaving themselves exposed in the back in the same way for the sake of creating chances in the attacking half. They're not doing those things. They have become more defensively solid, and their defensive numbers have improved. But their attacking numbers have cratered. And so you think about this as a slider, like video game style. If Postecoglou's version of Spurs was tilted all the way towards the attack, their defense was just rubbish. And now Frank's sort of sliders is tilted more towards the middle, where they're just truly not good at anything. And so they really haven't improved very much as a team. Would they improve? Would the attack look better with Madison and with Kulusevski and with a full season of Solanke? Of course it would. So that's where we do need to recognize this. And have Spurs had some decent moments on the continent this year? Yes, of course they have. But that's the problem, is that the team has not really executed the style of play that Frank has tried to instill in them. And Frank has not done a good job, by all accounts, of instilling that because they haven't been effective. Like, the vision is there. It's possible to see what this team has been trying to do, but the execution of that more reserved, more solid vision has just not been good enough.
Yeah, I mean, my logic on Frank coming into this season as Spurs manager, and I was relatively bullish. In fact, I think one of my Carl Anka does like bold predictions before the start of the season. I got one of them, Forest to have 3 managers this season. They're going to be on their 4th.
Talk about the one you
got it wrong.
again.
But the one that I got badly wrong was Spurs finishing in the top 5, which is not going to happen. And the logic was that while it was a stylistic shift going from Big Ange to Thomas Frank, if you remember how Spurs actually won the Europa League last season, it was pretty close to Frank ball. Like, remember how they played against Manchester United in that final? They sat deep, they played pretty compact, they kept it congested, and then they hit them on the counter-attack. And so I thought, well, if this Spurs team is built to do that under Big Ange, bring in a guy who that's his whole thing, and it might actually work. The issue has been, and this is kind of just adding on top of what Joe was outlining there, defensively, yeah, there has been a little bit of an improvement, but I thought of Brentford as they had so much conviction in the way that they would play in the counter-attack. They were absolutely rapid in getting up the field. They would send bodies forward. They were a bit of a frightening force under Thomas Frank, and I haven't seen any of that under Frank at Spurs. Now, I don't know whether that's a player buy-in thing. I don't know whether that is a personnel thing. I mean, they've been decimated by injuries. Solanke's only just returned from missing basically the whole season. Madison and Kulusevski never started a single game under Thomas Frank. They brought in Xavi Simons, who, by the way, was their 3rd choice for that number 10 position, but he's had to adapt to a new league, and he's still a young player, and you're trying to bed him in as well. So all the circumstances were a problem for Thomas Frank, but we never actually saw Frank ball for Spurs, and so they never got what they signed up for in that sense.
And I'm inclined to assume that is a player buy-in thing. It is the injury thing. I think it's also like not trying to make this into a bigger picture thing again, but it feels like it's a Tottenham thing. And I go back to when they first appoint Mauricio Pochettino, and there's some similarities here because it's Pochettino coming from Southampton, like a lower in the table Premier League side, but a side that like are well structured in their scouting, well organized in their recruitment. Kind of had buy-in and had the overarching philosophy that it feels like Pochettino established. You bring him into Spurs, and there is an immediate response. And I think some of that is because at the time, Spurs again, don't really know what they are, but are maybe less defined, less codified as being or as perceiving themselves as a Big Six club, as a, consistent Champions League club, even a title contender. And so I think when that's the situation, when there is less of that, when there is less of that attitude around the club, there is going to be buy-in. There's going to be more, I think, belief in what the manager is bringing, and you're going to get a little bit more scrap in training. You're going to get a little bit harder work, a little bit harder running. And it just feels like that isn't there as much. There was a really good anecdote in The Athletic. After Spurs lost so painfully to Arsenal, Frank lectured his players in the dressing room about standards dropping. The next day, multiple players, including Christian Romero, still turned up late to training. The club denied this was the case. Sources indicate the opposite is true. And it feels to me like right there, you have players who I think are like, I'm not here to play defensive football. We're supposed to be one of the best teams in England. We're supposed to be a Champions League contender. Why am I supposed to sit behind the ball? Why are we supposed to not have possession? And I think you run into that identity crisis with Spurs, and I'm not sure how you get out of it, because it seems like they want a manager who can play free-flowing, possession, high-scoring soccer, but maybe you don't have the personnel. Maybe you don't have the ability to acquire those personnel. I'm not sure how you make that happen. It feels a bit like a poison chalice at present.
Yeah, because Taylor, those players have been signed to play a different way, right? It goes back to what Joe was talking about, the whiplash between managers, where they go from Conte and Mourinho after Pochettino, by the way, but the idea with those two appointments was, right, we want to win now. They felt they were at that point, and they were very much not at that point. And then after that period, they go to Big Ange and exciting, attacking, bold, front foot football. And then after that is Thomas Frank, and now people are talking about Roberto De Zerbi. Like, Spurs are a club, they don't stand for anything. People talk about the Spurs way.
They had Nuno in there for like a week and a half.
They did, yeah. Ryan Mason a couple of times as well. But the Spurs as a club don't stand for anything, and so that dictates their or that's had a detrimental impact on their transfer activity, where they're built a squad that I don't think Spurs have actually bought bad players. And I keep making this point about Spurs. Like, I go through their squad, and I am having to reassess some of my opinions on these players, or maybe not quite as good as I thought they were. But nonetheless, there's talent in the squad if everyone is fit. But there's no guiding light to their transfer strategy, which hasn't been helped by the fact they've had Fabio Paratici, who was then suspended, then he comes back, then he's alongside Johan Lange, the technical director, then he leaves to go to Fiorentina. Lange was never hired to make signings, now he's making signings. Like, it's a nightmare. Like, in January, everyone clearly saw the need for a creative midfielder. Any kind of creative midfielder. That could be a deep-lying creative midfielder, someone a little bit higher up, someone in a number 8, just someone who could do something with the ball. And the one signing Spurs made was Conor Gallagher, who is a good player. Like, this is the whole thing with Spurs. Conor Gallagher is not a bad player. He is of that level. But he's exactly what they had previously and doesn't fill a need for them. And so this is where there's a broader discussion with Spurs. At executive level as well, they've been emptied out over the last 12 months. Daniel Levy has left, which is potentially a good thing for the club. But they haven't really replaced him in any meaningful sense. Vinay has come in from Arsenal, but we don't know how meaningfully he's been emboldened by the Lewis family, who continue to run Spurs and provide no real leadership. I was reading that no fewer than 12 new executive hires have been made in the last 6 months at Spurs. And so I think that's paralysed them a bit. They don't have a direction. They don't have a strategy. Like, who made the decision to fire Thomas Frank? I think it was Vinay who recommended it to the board. But did that come from someone with a sporting background? He's an executive. He's from a commercial background. So Spurs from top to bottom are not set up to be a successful club right now.
Graham, I want to go back to the talent side of things that you mentioned, because I am curious, and you've certainly seen more of Spurs than I, so I want to defer to your thinking here. As I was thinking about this team and trying to pick out players who could truly play for the biggest, like the best clubs, right? Forget biggest, what does that even mean, right? But City, Liverpool, Arsenal, the Bayern, top La Liga teams, and PSG. Those are the teams I'm talking about. Who are the players in this Tottenham team that you think could do that? Because I came up with one name, and that's Mickey van de Ven, and that was the end of my list.
Yep, Van de Ven is on there. I think you can't really separate the art from the artist in terms of Christian Romero, but if you can, I think Christian Romero on his day is as good as pretty much any centre-back in the Premier League. I'm a big fan of Dominic Solanke. He is barely fit. That's the issue with Dominic Solanke. But as an all-round centre-forward in a market where Jordan Strand-Larsen is going for 50 million, I think Solanke is a good player to have around. Other than that, there's maybe no one else.
And that's the thing is
Christian Romero, please.
I don't know. Like abstract, like a modern artist or
He's a
something.
disruptor.
Like David
Yeah.
Blaine, he's hanging in a box above the Thames.
Yeah, exactly. With a red card in his, I don't know how they pulled that off. I just don't buy this Spurs squad, right? I mean, these players are better than where they are on the table, right? That we can all agree on. But they've spent top of the line money on transfers to be a slightly better than mid-table team. Let's say all these players are fit and firing. They're not in the relegation scrap, like I said earlier with Madison and Kulusevski and Solanke if he's healthy for the full year. They are probably not in the Champions League places though, or at least they're not a guarantee for that spot. And I know that Big Ange went on the overlap and talked about how the wages sort of are a challenge, maybe in some senses more than the transfer fees. They're just not getting players that are at the level of where they need to be, like of where they want to be, where they say they should be, where they're trying to dare to do, or whatever that means. Like it's just not. I'm just really fixated on that because I think it's so stupid. It just doesn't exist. Like those players aren't here, and that's a huge problem, obviously.
But they're not there because they failed in their pursuits, right? Like, Graham, you alluded to it, but like Eze is the prime example, right? Where they feel like they have that deal done, but they don't force it over the line. They don't, cross the T's,
people don't
dot
want
the
to play
I's,
for
get the
Tottenham.
signatures,
Gibbs
and he
White
ends
as
up
well
going
was
to
the other
Arsenal.
one.
What's that?
Gibbs White was the other one. They thought that he was in the bag, and he would have. I mean, we'll never know. It's hypothetical and all guesswork, but I would bet he would have hit the ground running better than Xavi Simons has.
And then, from what I read, Semenyo is the third. That they thought he was too expensive in the summer, so they wanted to wait till January, and by January, City are there. City can spend more money. Here we are. So there have been the opportunities to bring in those players. It just seems like they have not executed perfectly, and so they end up with players that are good and maybe will be great, like Xavi Simons, but at the same time aren't really ready to like hit the ground running. It's a new league. You've got to get acclimated until you put yourself into that kind of position. So they don't have the players, and simultaneously it's kind of their fault they don't have those players. But Joe, I don't think you should buy this squad now. I think you should wait until the relegation release clauses kick in and they're
Good call.
cheaper.
Yeah, nice. But
I don't think they're getting relegated. That's the thing, and I think that is just because it's Tottenham and they have the money they do and the profile they do. So, Graham, I think like you've made compelling arguments. I think all of my responses would just be like, yeah, but they're not going to be in the relegation zone. And maybe they will be, but it's just still so hard for me to get my head around that.
How much? Same, absolutely same. But how much of that argument is based on the complacency, like the associated complacency that we don't think of Spurs as a relegation team? Because I've watched a lot of Spurs recently. They are the third worst team that I have watched over the last couple months. And I think Spurs, they're worse than West Ham at the moment. I watched West Ham against Manchester United. I actually thought they were pretty good. They're about a minute away from beating an informed Manchester United team. I've watched Leeds recently. They've been better than Spurs. These teams have a clearer idea, and maybe this is the more pertinent point. They have a clearer idea of what they are. Forest maybe aren't in that bucket right now. They've got issues of their own, having just changed their manager this week as well. But that's where I land with Spurs in this discussion around them being relegation candidates. Is if you actually watch them and look at the players they've got as well, with all these injuries, look at the team that they're putting out. Archie Gray in central midfield, Sousa, who I wasn't even aware they signed in January, apparently a teenage Brazilian defender, makes his debut in that game at Old Trafford because Christian Romero comes off and Jed Spence comes off with an injury. Look at how they're playing and look at the players they're actually putting on the pitch. And if that was Nottingham Forest or if that was Leeds, you would absolutely have them down as relegation candidates.
Wow. You're rebadging as Leeds, and we'll see how that turns out for them. But I think ultimately this discussion we've had over the past couple of minutes, it comes back to what Big Ange said on that overlap, in the lack of desire to take risks and the fact that they're maybe not as big a club as they aspire to be. So Taylor, the players you mentioned, they missed out on. It's because they don't pay as much as other teams. They don't offer the wages. They don't offer the package that those players can get elsewhere because they're not as quite at the echelon of the teams that Joe mentioned earlier, and because they don't take the risk and take the financial plunge to get those players in. That's it, right? It's all economics.
Well, it's economics, and it's also just making bad decisions, right? Because they have the money to be able to offer a little bit more on wages if they don't spend money on Mohamed Kudus, right? Just as an example. I'm not saying that I would do a better job of recruiting for Tottenham than Tottenham have done for themselves, which is to say they've done a poor job. I would do an even worse job. But you can spend the money they do have.
The scouting network will handle that recruitment for you.
100%. Great call, Taylor. I like that.
That's why we launched it.
Yeah, we're outsourcing that, of course. I mean, I'm not doing it. It's just they've just spent a lot of money poorly, and it's not that they've bought terrible players. It's that they don't have a vision, and when you don't have a vision for what you are, And probably the vision for what Tottenham should be in 3 years needs to look different from where Tottenham's vision should be in a decade, right? And the vision for a month from now probably looks different than the one for 3 years. You're operating in different horizons here, but there's no clarity on what this is supposed to look like. And that's been so apparent from the recruitment of both players and coaches, and it's a massive problem.
Yeah, 100%. But then you get these gravity-defying teams like Man United who also don't have a vision or a philosophy, and they're fourth. So it's...
But they are willing to spend £300,000 a week on a single player, which Spurs, like
true.
Mark Getty was talked about by Big Ange on the overlap. He's just signed for Man City, which obviously you'd make that decision even if the pay was all things being equal. But Man City are paying him £300,000 a week, so he'd be I think he'd be double what Spurs' top paid player is.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what Postecoglou is getting at. I take Joe's point about transfer fees, but a better indicator of performance in the Premier League and basically any league is the wage bill. And I think Spurs are at the moment, what are they, 8th? They're below Newcastle, they're below Villa, they're below the other big 6 teams. And so when you look at that, there is definitely a detachment or a disconnect between the expectation. Like, I think Spurs under Levy did a great job of faking it until they made it. Like I was for a long time I was a bit of a defender of Daniel Levy because I thought you look at the stadium, you look at the training facilities. I grew up in an era where Spurs were a mid-table team and would maybe make a run in a cup every so often, but they were never thought of as like a Big Six team. The Big Six didn't exist at that point. And so to a certain stage, I thought Daniel Levy did an excellent job of inflating and elevating Spurs to a certain level. But beyond that point, there's been no vision as to what comes after that. And that's the no man's land that Spurs now find themselves in.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Graham. I was going to make this point as well. When I were a lad, when my team was in the Premier League, Tottenham would routinely finish between sort of 10th and 16th. That was kind of their level. Even a few years ago, they're playing at White Hart Lane. Kind of a humble stadium. A not very good stadium it was. And now they've got a completely different infrastructure and setup. They've obviously qualified for the Champions League a few times, and they did do in the past, to be fair as well. But it's almost as if they've got a new bar of expectation, and they're not hitting that expectation because they don't have the financial might to do so. So there's a disconnect there, definitely. So We'll see how that pans out. Best stadium in the Championship, says Graham.
We are still talking about a team that finished 4th in the phasing of the Champions League and are through to the next round.
Sure.
Like it is a weird situation in
Taylor?
which like whoever takes over is like, oh, by the way, you have knockout competitions in the Champions League still coming up. So
Yeah.
figure that out.
They just need to win it and everything will be fine and they'll be in the Champions League next
That's
season while they're playing Lincoln away.
Goodness me. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll look at what's next and for both Tottenham and for Thomas Frank. Do join us then. Total Soccer Show, welcome back to the big thing. I just had a terrifying thought during the break there. We've just launched our scouting network. What if tomorrow Tottenham launch one and they completely undercut us because they need to do some better scouting as well? That's just terrifying.
Yeah, but then the next day they'll stop funding it, and the third day after that they'll forget about it, and the fourth day after that they'll claim it's the best one in the world and we can beat them. It's fine.
That's it. And then we all get hired as executives because it's our turn at that point.
To scout is to scout.
That's
To dare is to do, by the way. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, just do it for Nike. I get that. To dare is to do? Is it? Is it, Tottenham?
Apparently
Anyway.
so.
Yeah, there we go. Anyway, Taylor, what's next? If you were one of the revolving door of executives at Tottenham Hotspur, what would be your recommendation for what Spurs do next?
I think you call up Mauricio Pochettino and passively say, like, are you sure you want to manage the World Cup? Like, it doesn't seem like it'd be that fun. Come
We
on.
have lemons.
I mean, I would, that's it.
He kept
The
them
first
for
selling
you.
point. Look how
They've been
many lemons.
preserved.
It's a whole wall. It's a load-bearing wall of lemons. I mean, there's precedent of a manager managing a club and a national team simultaneously.
No way that happens. 0%
No way that happens.
chance.
But I think he is the clear answer for them. I think their best course of action, I do not know in the short term, because I think they run into the problem that we've already talked about, where I feel like they don't have like the lineage and legacy such that they could bring in a beloved former player who's done his badges and is sort of going to be able to at least inspire a little bit of like, hey, you know, like this guy's kind of fun and we're all playing together and we're having a good time. Like the person who might have been that is Michael Carrick. And there's a world in which Ole Gunnar Solskjaer gets hired by Manchester United and Michael Carrick, lest we forget, a former Spurs player, goes there and rights the ship and steadies things, and it's an odd one. There's also a world in which Manchester United wins the Europa League, and that changes things too. There's a lot of sliding doors with Spurs and Manchester United at present. But I think longer term, I do think everything we've talked about does open the door to Pochettino being like the, in all caps, solution. And I know Joe has said that a manager is not just going to solve things. It's not just one
Correct.
person. But everything we're talking about is that it seems like there is a diffusion of responsibility and no one has a clear vision for how to move forward. And if everybody is sort of treading water and unsure what to do, one person coming in and wanting control and wanting to guide recruitment philosophy and academy philosophy and playing style, I mean, that feels like it's Pochettino, who has like prior experience certainly at the club. And I think if you are basically giving him control and saying, hey, we'll sign the players you think we need to sign, we're going to back you, all the players are going to have to buy in, and I think he has the profile and the pedigree to get that buy-in that I certainly think Thomas Frank did not. If Mauricio Pochettino drank out of a cup that had an Arsenal logo on it, I don't think anybody cares. With Thomas Frank, it is part of the story of him never understanding the club and why he had to go. Like, I think there is something to be said for profile and pedigree factoring into how much leeway you are given and how much love you're going to get from the supporters. And I think Mauricio Pochettino is that guy, but you just aren't going to be able to get him before the summer. So I don't know how you bridge that divide.
I mean, there's no denying Poch is the guy that the Spurs fans collectively want. As I say, they were chanting his name very loudly during the Newcastle game. He's been openly flirting with Spurs for months. He did the High Performance podcast last week where he said, kind of stupidly, that Spurs have to be aiming to win the Premier League and the Champions League, and obviously their fans love that, so it feels like he's very much making a pitch for the job. I don't think there's any manager on the planet that is the solution for what Spurs are going through right now. I do think, though, Pochettino, they can rewind the tape back to to his first spell in charge. Where Spurs,
we don't need to do that. We don't need to point out all the ways in which this probably won't work. Sure, shush, Graham, shush.
No, I'm going to try and make the argument, Taylor, for why appointing him could be part of the solution, right? So there are very few clubs. One of the things that I think gets missed in this whole discussion about, like, this modern discussion about how clubs need to have an identity and then hire the manager, very rarely do you actually see that kind of work. What often will happen is they will hire a manager and that manager becomes the person who sets the identity, sets the philosophy for generations to come, right? We see that with Guardiola. Does anyone think Man City, when Guardiola leaves, are going to go out and appoint like a Thomas Frank sort of manager? No, they're going to get someone who's going to build on what Pep Guardiola's done. And that's what Spurs should have done with Pochettino. So by bringing him back, yes, you can make him like the crux of your new philosophy. He can basically dictate the terms there, but he can't do it all on his own. And the thing I remember from Pochettino's first type of spell in charge was how Daniel Levy, he's very demanding in the transfer market, Pochettino, where Daniel Levy's frustration was he would come to him with players and Poch would say, no, that's not the player that I want. Then the narrative was Spurs weren't backing Pochettino, and the pushback was, well, we're willing to spend this money, we just can't find players that he likes. So there needs to be some synergy, some integration there with a front office. You build the front office around Pochettino because, frankly, I don't think Spurs have the time to, number one, figure out what the Lewis family want this club to look like at ownership level, then trickle down into like the executive level with Vinay, right? What's your role and responsibility at this club? Then build out a front office, which needs building out because they've just lost Paratici. No one really knows what Johan Lange's role is. And then hire a manager. Like, there's only 4 months until the end of the season, and clubs like Manchester United and others, Real Madrid, are positioning for managers coming out of the World Cup, the other side of the World Cup. So I don't know if there's the time to do that, but I think you could build around Pochettino in a way that makes some sort of sense.
Yeah, that's all fair, and I think I agree with that in ultimate sense. They should just hire De Zerbi now because he'll be gone by the end of the season, and then they can perfectly align the timeline to hire Poch next. That's what I would do if you want to light as much money on fire as possible. Just go get De Zerbi, snap your style one more time, and then the ground will really be set for Poch to go and have the impact that he wants, rising this club from the ashes. That's what I think they should do. Is
this based on the idea De Zerbi's going to flame out by the end
Correct.
of the season? They're going to get relegated, and
Absolutely.
the bar is going to be so low that Poch can only succeed.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I do think the Poch hire makes sense for them. Pochettino's thirsty to be back in the Premier League after the World Cup, so I think that works for him, and it would work for Tottenham. I mean, part of this, as much as it frustrates me, because I suppose this is just not how I operate, and so I have a hard time understanding it sometimes, part of the next hire is about just absorbing as much goodwill from your fans as possible so they stop yelling at you while you're trying to fix this. Right? I mean, that ultimately, that's part of this, isn't it? Because Spurs fans made the environment toxic, and I don't. That's not how I would choose to act, if I'm being honest, and I don't really think it's great for people to be like chanting at someone to lose his job because these are real people. Like I'm not very into that as a person, but I'm sympathetic to the fact that Spurs have to make some decisions on the back of, well, is our environment going to be toxic or not? Because it's hard to do good work in a toxic environment. And I think Poch is the one that earns you the most goodwill. He's going to be available, even if the timeline isn't quite perfect with preseason. Graham, you've raised that point. I think it's a good one. You just have to sacrifice the short term for the medium term if you're Spurs, and they've already put in a whole lot of toil and sacrifice to get to this point. I think they're going to need to sacrifice a little bit more. Poch is the one that's going to give them the most time with fans. He's a reasonable hire to sort of work you back into some sort of relevance. I think it would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, the timing is a point, Joe, that I've raised a couple times with these World Cup coaches. Tuchel, by the way, is off the market now. He's signed a new contract with England until Euro 2028. Not that he'd go to Spurs, I think, but just in a broad sense. But the World Cup isn't over until mid-July. That's if the team makes the final. Even if you get knocked out before then. Yeah, but even if, let's say the US get knocked out in, I mean, even like the round of 16 or whatever, right? Let's hope they go further than that. But he's still going to need, a week or two of time off before the start of the season? Then you're into like mid to late July, and preseason is very much underway by that point. So I don't think the timing is as easy as a lot of people maybe think it is with these World Cup coaches. Who else do we think the potential candidates would be? De Zerbi has obviously just left Marseille this week.
Permanent?
Yes, not an interim manager. So Glasner and Areola are up. Their contracts are up at the end of the season. Marco Silva as well. I think Areola and Glasner might encounter the same issues that Thomas Frank stylistically has encountered. There was a good Michael Cox piece for The Athletic this week about how difficult it is for, I guess, underdog coaches in the Premier League to scale up their style of play. There we go.
Yeah.
So I think Glasner and Areola maybe isn't the way to go for Spurs. Enzo Maresca is the other one I've seen mentioned. But then Chelsea fans complained about his style of, in a different sort of way, but they still complained that his style of play was dull and not exactly invigorating. So it's slim pickings, I think.
I mean, Harry Redknapp is on the list, is all I'm going to say. That's where we are at this time. I've got a nominee for you, Graham. It's a man who's won leagues in multiple countries, has connections to Spurs as a player. I believe they're even one of his boyhood clubs. Robbie Keane?
He's
Ferencvaros
quite high up in
manager,
the
I
betting
believe.
odds. Yeah, Celtic keep getting linked with him as well.
Is he really? Wow.
Yeah, he's been in Israel as well. He's had a strange managerial career to this point.
I mean,
We'll see.
maybe he like has the profile, and as a player he brings in some of that. But like I think that seems to be a thing. Like I can't get away from that with Thomas Frank. That it seems like from the jump he had a little bit of the David Moyes at Manchester United. Just the do you get what this is? Do you understand what we want to be? It seems like maybe this isn't for you. And that's part of what the Michael Cox article was getting at. I thought that was really fascinating, Graham. The idea that if you look at coaches who had low possession shares with their perceived smaller club prior to making the jump to the bigger club, almost always it does not go well. Like the only exception to that is basically Mauricio Pochettino going to Spurs the first time. Outside of that, you run into that problem of that style isn't really going to translate because there are greater expectations for attacking football at larger clubs with larger budgets, and getting people on board for your philosophy in the first place can be tricky if they don't sort of trust where you're coming from or trust what you're trying to do. And then if you're making little gaffes along the way, I think that hurts you further. And I just think there's so many names. Like Marco Silva has been a great manager for Fulham, has a lot of experience, I think probably runs into the same problems, rightly or wrongly. Oliver Glasner the same. So it seems like a situation in which you need somebody who has like connections to the club, is young and can bring good vibes, but also can be a potential permanent manager, but isn't necessarily going to be the permanent manager because you want to keep that door open long term. Short of like my only other thought is do you go for somebody like Xabi Alonso? Like is that a way to generate goodwill, to be like, look, we've got this guy, the Madrid thing is an outlier, he's going to come here, he's going to be successful, everybody knows his name, everybody's excited about him. I think people are still excited about him at least. Do you roll the dice that way? It's still a roll of the dice, don't get me wrong, but if you're going to have to do that no matter what, why not roll big?
That might be a one-sided roll of the dice, I think.
I think if they can get Xabi Alonso, you go for Xabi Alonso. You offer him everything he could ever want. I just think he's going to have other offers from more attractive clubs. Taylor, the comparison that I saw was Roy Hodgson at Liverpool, which I thought was spot on. That's what this has been. Even down to some of the things that Thomas Frank said in this job. And look, Thomas Frank seems like a nice guy. That is something that gets trotted out in the media. Seems to be pals with everyone in the media. But one of the things he said is unveiling as Spurs manager. He was asked, what can you guarantee? I think that was the question. What can you guarantee Spurs fans? Which is a bit of a loaded question. But he said, well, the only thing I can guarantee is that we will lose games. Which is like strictly true. But you're unveiling.
I love that so much. That gets me so juiced, that answer.
You're unveiling. It doesn't exactly get fans or even players on your side. And that's such a stark contrast to Big Ange, who was all about belief and like, we will win a trophy in my second season. So to go from that to Thomas Frank, I think was such a wild, wild shift to make.
Ironically, a very frank thing to say.
So Frank. It was. So Thomas.
And true and accurate and like a real sentiment that
totally.
then you get clubbed for saying like. But again, like I think there's a world in which if you're a Southampton manager, you can say that, not just because they are a smaller club, but because I think you have fewer ears and fewer keyboard warriors waiting to tear you apart, and so maybe you have more people willing to listen to the second part of that, which I assume was. Like, but we're going to learn from those losses, and with each loss, we will learn new things about our team, build towards a collective whole, win silverware, be the best version of ourselves. And with a club where you don't have as much attention, as much eyes, as much scrutiny, I think people are going to be like, yeah, whatever, fine. But when it's Tottenham, when it's Real Madrid, when it's whomever, I think that is going to start off with, like, the giant headline is Thomas Frank, we will lose games. And right there, you've kind of set yourself up for a rough couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's where the Hodgson comparison lies. That's where it hits. There's something more to it. Like he didn't fully understand how the gig of being Brentford manager is just fundamentally and I guess like spiritually different from being a Big Six manager. And comments like that are true, and I understand why he says that, but that's not really how you manage a Big Six club in the Premier League. I don't think.
Yeah. Graham, the Roy Hodgson quote about like leaving Liverpool and being like, I don't understand what went wrong. I was the same manager and I did the same stuff and said the same things that I've always said, but it didn't work here. And then he listed all of the clubs that weren't even close to Liverpool's stature as to like proof that he could have done it. And it's sort of like, yeah, do you see how you're actually spelling out the problem like in what you're saying right now? And I'm not sure he did. Maybe he does now. Yeah. Gotta love Uncle Roy.
It will be interesting to see if Thomas Frank gets another Premier League job after what's happened at Tottenham and after Brentford have shown that basically you could have a sentient potato in a windbreaker.
They're looking so good right now. Like their model. I blue skied that. I said, can Spurs hire Brentford's model as their new manager? Because that's what they really need.
Indeed.
Is it Keith Andrews at Brentford? Yeah. Just swap them. Keith Andrews goes to Spurs and Thomas Frank goes right back to Brentford.
That'll fix it.
No.
Everybody have good hair. Is that a criteria for the Brentford job? Do they have good hair? Because Keith Andrews has outstanding hair.
Yeah.
I mean, that could be on the list. Throw it on there. What is, if anybody has an idea off the top of their head, because I didn't have time to research this, what is the fastest a manager has ever returned to their former club? Like if Thomas Frank, like let's say that did happen and Brentford did have an opening and Frank went back. Like I'm assuming that's happened before where somebody moved to a club, was there for like a month, it didn't work out and moved right back.
There's got to be some Italian ones who've done that a few times. I'm trying to think.
Well, probably in the same season.
Pretty close to it.
Yeah, there we go. Good stuff. All right, we will see what happens for Tottenham and for Thomas Frank in due course. Checks Nottingham Forest socials to see who's been hired yet. Not quite yet, but we'll keep an eye on that. But for now, that is...
Sorry, man, I thought he spoke pretty well at his Palace unveiling, Thomas Frank.
Do a few more lines so we've got them all covered? Yep, very good. Excellent. The big thing done. Thank you very much for joining us on this one, listener. Taylor Rockwell, thank you very much for your insights as always, Sar.
Right back at you, my friend.
Graham Ruthven, the tapes have been scrubbed from the preseason. Don't worry, we're all good.
Thanks, Ryan Bailey.
Joe Lowry, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ryan.
And listener, thank you again for joining us on this one. We'll be back on the feed very shortly indeed. But for now, bye.